heard on election day. Now, 7:30 in the morning on election day, my phone rings and I get a call from one of my friends who is at a polling location, and it's basically being told that he has to vote provisional. He brought in every single form of proof that he could bring to show that he was a registered voter. He brought his ID, he brought his sample ballot, he brought his voter registration card in the mail. Still, they could not find his name on the rolls. Ultimately, they had to make him vote provisional. Finally, after asking, after he had cast his ballot as provisional, finally did they check the other voter rolls, the supplemental voter rolls of new voters, as well as at other tables, and they found his name there. Now, I wish I could say that this was an isolated incident, but this incident was far too common on election day, especially around a lot of the major universities around Los Angeles. The University of Southern California, the University of California, Los Angeles, California State University, Northridge. The list goes on and on and on of students who had registered to vote, but their names couldn't be found on the rolls either because they were on another roll or they didn't check the supplemental rolls. Now, I know a lot of my fellow colleagues at other colleges have spent countless hours registering voters, making sure to inform voters of their rights, if they're no party preference, how to request a crossover ballot. And to have a situation like this is completely unacceptable, and it is appalling. Furthermore, at one polling location at around the University of Southern California, Vermont Avenue Elementary School, we had the county which had not sent an entire voter roll to that polling location, meaning that if a student were to walk in there and was on that missing list, they would be made to vote provisional. It's as if they weren't there. This is outrageous, and this cannot be allowed to happen. Buenos días, mi nombre es Ryan López, soy estudiante en la Universidad del Sur de California y les quiero decir sobre lo que pasó, sobre lo que observé el día de elección. A las 7:30 de la mañana recibí una llamada de uno de mis amigos que estuvo en una locación para votar y que no pudo votar. Trajo cada forma para comprobar que fue votante. Trajo su identificación, trajo su baleta ejemplar, trajo su tarjeta que dice que está registrado, pero todavía le dijeron que no estaba en la lista para votar. Lo hicieron que votara con baleta provisional y después de que votó con baleta provisional, encontraron su nombre en otra lista en esa locación. Me gustaría decirles que ese fue el único incidente ese día, pero esto era muy común en todas las alrededor de las universidades grandes de Los Ángeles, la Universidad del Sur de California, la Universidad de California Los Ángeles, la Universidad Cal State Northridge. Todas estas universidades, los estudiantes han estado trabajando por horas y horas y semanas, meses, para registrar a votantes y asegurarse que sepan sus derechos, cómo recibir una baleta demócrata si fueran sin preferencia de partido. Entonces, para que sea una situación como esta, completamente inaceptable, y algo tiene que cambiar. Finalmente, cuando fui yo a una locación a la primaria Vermont Elementary en Los Ángeles, vi que el condado no le habían mandado a esa locación una lista de votantes enteras. Eso significa que si una persona entrara y estuviera en esa lista que no estaba, es como que si no existieran, que nunca hubieran votado. Como dije, esto no es aceptable y tiene que cambiar. Muchas gracias.
We're here today to speak to members of the Board of Supervisors about what we feel are gross problems in the elections. Shame on Associated Press for declaring Hillary Clinton the winner on the day before the June 7th California primary election. And shame on MSNBC and CNN for grabbing the story and running with it. This story went global, and it all happened before a single vote was cast. AP impacted what happened next in very negative and misleading ways. To millions of new voters in California and viewers around the world, it sure sounded like it was over. So what did happen next? How did AP calling the election before a single vote was cast manifest itself? People shared with me about the hoops they went through just to get registered. Some people weren't going to vote because they thought the race was over. I know because I was still out talking to voters on June 6th and 7th after the AP release. Some voters in Washington, D.C. today may also be wondering about what's happening on their voting day today. The D.C. election certainly has not been in the news much. In a June 12th LA Times article by Kathleen Decker, and now Lessons for November, the writer got it all wrong. Her story of the low turnout of new voters is simply not true. If you factor in the 3.5 million still in process of being counted, that's the last of the mail-ins and provisional ballots cast on June 7th. It was reported it will be about 47% of all registered voters in California. A huge turnout for a California primary. Much more is at stake in this election than winning. Hearing the passionate voices of new voters, especially young people, as we move closer to the conventions, is increasingly important. The U.S. has among the lowest percentage of registered voters of any developed country. Of those, the percentage of voters voting is low. We can and must do more to make voting easier and more transparent. I would like to urge the Board of Supervisors to move quickly to provide whatever is needed to facilitate the count of remaining unprocessed ballots in days and not weeks. Justice delayed is, after all is said and done, justice denied. We can and must do better. Thank you for your time and interest in all being here today. Thank you.
My name is Todd Jones. I'm a physicist at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and I love data very much. So I signed up to be a election poll, an exit poll worker to monitor the voters coming out of the UCLA polling place. I love data, so I wanted to see what was really happening in this election. So it was an opportunity to inspect that. Let's start with the definition. Election fraud is when a voter's vote is not counted. And what I saw was many young voters coming out of that election, out of that polling place, holding the provisional ballots. I'd estimate 3 out of 4 of the young voters exiting, 3 out of 4 of all of the voters exiting that polling place carried the provisional ballot. And the reason they carried that provisional ballot was they had signed up, they had registered to vote recently, and there was a list called the blue list. Their names were supposed to be on that list, and that list was not present at the polling place. The polling place captain had called into Norwalk to get that list delivered. It was never delivered all day long. So every single voter who had signed up with, who had registered recently, had to be given the provisional ballot from that location. 3 out of 4 of those new young voters were all denied their right to vote. That is election fraud. Thank you.
Here in Los Angeles County. I appreciate the opportunity to come this morning to share with you some information about the June 7th presidential primary election. As was stated in your introductory remarks, this was an extraordinary election. The presidential primary is the most complex election that we conduct in the state of California, and there are elements of it that by design are challenging, certainly challenging for voters, cumbersome for poll workers, and difficult to administer. I think we talked with each of your offices in advance of the election about those things. We took on extraordinary measures to try and address those issues, but I think it's important to acknowledge today that we recognize that there were issues that came out during the election. we're working to address those. We've tried very transparently to address those. I spent a considerable amount of my time on election day, either directly corresponding with voters through social media to address those issues as well. So I appreciate the opportunity to come and walk through the assertions that have been made about the election, let you know the steps we've taken, what we did before the election, and also I'll conclude with some comments on some things that I think that we can take care of going forward. Just a little bit of context to get us started. I think it is to recognize, again, that this is a unique election. It's run differently than our typical elections. It only happens every 4 years. We've had a lot of new voters who had never voted in a presidential primary or a partisan primary in California, and certainly in the time frame since we moved to the top 2 primary system. So this is the first time many voters ever experienced an election where they had to have a party-specific ballot. That was further complicated by the fact that the major political parties make a decision based on their rules on which non-partisan voters can participate in their primary, and those rules were different in the 2 major parties in this election. We have 4,511 polling places in LA County, spread out over 4,000 square miles. We rely on the work of 22,300 very dedicated and very critically important poll workers to deliver those services on election day. So as I go through these issues, I will try to again touch on them and then respond to questions. I do want to mention in particular, because I know that you have all been informed, I'm aware of a particularly egregious circumstance at a polling place in Echo Park. There's a video that has gone out about that. I want you to know that we are looking at it very, very closely. During the post-election canvass, I'm having all of the poll workers who worked at that polling place interviewed and talking to the facility manager at that location, and we are looking for a complete record of that, and we will have that available by the time we certify the election. So, again, just to launch into this, I think it's important to note that voting is an individual act, but it has a cumulative impact. It requires significant resources deployed in a short period of time over a great distance. It also relies on transparency, security, and accountability. And I think we
are frustrating for many of us. We did come to sound the alarm about a month before the elections of the issues that we already had uncovered that were being presented, including people being dropped from the rolls that have been long-time voters. And even on election day, they still couldn't find their names, and it was very frustrating. I am an organizer with Bernie Sanders Brigade. I do represent a lot of voters that were cheated in many different ways, whether it was purposely or not. That's something that needs to be discovered. But we do have concerns, and those concerns need to be addressed all the way from the top. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.